All right, welcome everyone. This interview is part of our Discover a Debut author series, which is about helping you discover your next great read by connecting you with an exciting new voice in fiction. They have the attention of the big publishers, so now it's time for you to meet the next big thing and maybe find your next favorite. So today I'm joined by debut author Jessica Zhan Mei Yu to talk about her novel, But the Girl. Jessica is a writer of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. She has a PhD in creative writing from the University of Melbourne, where she currently teaches. But the Girl is described as a coming-of-age novel for readers of The Idiot by Elif Batuman and Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zorner. So welcome, Jessica. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, so But the Girl, it really follows the tradition of post-colonial homage. So books like Jean Rees's Wide Sargasso Sea, which is of course a prequel to Jane Eyre, and Zadie Smith's On Beauty, which is a homage to Howard's End. So But the Girl is really a homage to The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, which wrestles lovingly with its depictions of people of colour and centres on an Asian Australian protagonist named Girl. The protagonist of my book is a PhD student who is writing a dissertation on Plath and grappling with what it means to really love the literature that hates you, to feel both deeply seen and unseen by a text that gets everything about you, but is also written by someone who most likely never interacted with anyone that looks like you. So yeah, that's kind of the overall idea behind the book.
That sounds really, really interesting. So, where did the inspiration for the book come from for you?
Yeah, it really came from those kinds of two books that I just mentioned there. So Zadie Smith's On Beauty is one of my favorite books. It's a campus novel. It's a homage to Howard's End, and it really is this interesting way of writing back to the Victorian novel, but populating it with Black characters. And she does that so beautifully in that book. And also Wide Sargasso Sea, which is this real post-colonial touchstone for a lot of writers, which rethinks the mad woman in Jane Eyre, and really reimagines her life in a new way. So those kinds of works of reimagining, intertextuality are really inspirations for my book, because I love intertextuality. I love books about books and books about literature. And it's really a way of kind of writing back to canon and rethinking the very notion of canon.
That's great. And so the novel focuses on Girl finding her own identity and grappling with the idea that the way to do that is through understanding her family and culture, her Malaysian culture. So, what inspired you to write about that particular search for identity and embedding that culture into the book?
So the Bildungsroman, or the coming of age form, is a very sort of androcentric, Eurocentric form. It usually features the kind of protagonist who is a special individual who kind of leaves home to find themselves and goes on this huge journey. I wanted to kind of subvert that form by making it a sort of coming of age story where you actually find yourself by coming back home. And it kind of, in that way, is my idea of what the Bildungsroman could be, or what a coming of age story could be. Yeah.
That's great. So there's lots of colourful characters in the book, really strong personalities. Um, are any of the characters based on people that you know in your own life? Particularly Girl's grandmother, Ama, who is, I guess, one of the characters that, kind of takes her on that journey of her own culture and identity.
Yeah, so as I said before, the Bildungsroman as a form is usually about this individual person who goes out into the world and kind of does their own thing. But my book actually starts with my grandmother, a sort of picture of my grandmother, someone inspired by my grandmother, but not exactly her, and ends with her as well. And for me, that's kind of a statement about the way that in my culture, I sort of see myself as one part or one branch of a family tree, not kind of an individual who goes and does their own thing, if that makes sense. And yeah, so I think I based those characters a little on my family, but very, very much an exaggerated version, because the truth is that, my life is very normal and my family is very loving and very lovely. That doesn't necessarily make for the most interesting book, like we went and had dinner and we had a normal conversation and then we kind of all
Yeah.
split. But for a novel, I wanted to kind of amp up that kind of drama, that kind of potential comedy, that kind of charisma, I guess, in the character,
Mhm. Yeah.
make it something that was sort of larger than life. Yeah.
And that I think that definitely comes through
Yeah.
the larger than life character. It's very
Yeah.
entertaining as well. So one thing I wanted to ask you about in the book, Girl is interested in the color of people's passports. Red for her parents, blue for her. Can you tell us about the significance of this and what it symbolizes?
I think that girl is someone who is quite interested in giving weight to kind of inanimate things or minor things, giving these things a kind of symbolic weight. So,
Mm,
of course, the color of a person's passport is not really a huge deal in a literal sense, it's just the color. But she starts to sort of see this kind of difference between her parents and herself, her and the other people at the residency by sort of thinking about the color of their passports. So it's really about the way that she walks around the world, seeing little things and kind of being like, this kind of strikes me for some reason. It's kind of, so she's a very much like an observational consciousness, sort of floating around the world, really kind of seeing things in kind of sharp and very perceptive ways. So yeah.
Thank you. So it's Multicultural Month here in Queensland in August. So it's very timely to be getting an insight into Malaysian culture that comes through the book and the understanding of immigrants trying to find their identity in a new country. Can you tell us why it was important for you to share the immigrant story with your readers?
I mean, I think it's one that I know very well from my experience, but I'm also really concerned about making sure that it's clear to readers this is kind of how I perceive it, and this is partly my experience, but there are so many other immigrant experiences out there, and we're not a monolith. It's, completely very, very diverse and very, very disparate in some ways, and people have all kinds of experiences. So this is one experience of the kind of way that immigrants might find their way through the world. And my experience is that my parents were, in some ways, very, very kind of open-minded, very, very quirky. They kind of went with their own kind of vibe and their own way of looking at the world. We'd be part of diasporic communities or immigrant communities, and I noticed my parents would do things kind of differently. They kind of, whatever they felt was right, they kind of go with that. And it was the same with Australian society. If they felt like Australian society was telling them to assimilate in X, Y, and Z ways, it was really in their hearts, it was like, well, what do we think is right? What do we kind of believe in? And so that very strong kind of character, I think, is something I want to get across in my novels, that I really admire my parents, that they kind of never really, I guess, bowed to anyone in that sense.
Mhm.
Um, for me as a second generation immigrant, so I wasn't born in Malaysia, I was born in Australia. The rest of my family is from Malaysia. I think it's kind of different. I think you look at your parents and you see people who are very practical, who are very like sensible, who have had to sort of in some ways focus on the main thing for them, which was making a new life in a new country, which is not an easy thing. For me as a second generation immigrant, I think I had the luxury of really thinking about identity, of thinking about, well, who am I? How do I fit into this world? How do I perceive this world? Because I wasn't plagued by visa problems. I wasn't trying to, find my way in Australia with very little sort of savings and that kind of thing. I had the luxury to really think about this stuff. That's something that I think a lot of second generation immigrants can relate to. So yeah, that's kind of, I think that comes through in my book, that kind of those different perspectives and those different ways of sort of moving through the world as a sort of both first and second generation immigrant. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I think what you said about perspectives, and I think for readers out there, it's a real privilege to see those different perspectives and view the world differently through a book like that. So I have a couple of questions for all the emerging writers out there who I guess can get some inspiration from your journey to publication. Can you tell us about your path to becoming a published author?
Yeah, I wanted to be a writer since I was like 8 because I just loved books so much and I loved the kind of pleasure they gave me. I wanted to give someone else that kind of experience, I guess. And so I guess my path was I was as a child and even as a teenager kind of submitting to different prizes and journals and kind of getting involved with the literary scene that way. When I went to university, I was studying creative writing, and so I became very involved with kind of literary journals in Melbourne and kind of festivals and that kind of thing. And yeah, I think it was 2020, we were locked down. I had
Mhm.
nothing better to do than to kind of refine the novel. I started my PhD and kind of just keep working on it. And yeah, and it got shortlisted for the Victorian Premier's Literary Award in 2020. And then from there, I got representation from my amazing agent, Sophie, and she sold it in the UK and here. And yeah, since then, I've really enjoyed, that kind of journey, and it's been a great one. It's definitely one that I think is kind of, it's kind of hard being a debut writer because you're like, oh my gosh, my story is going out in the world. But it's also really exciting and a real privilege as well. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think for all the emerging writers out there, it is really inspiring to hear about your journey. So I guess if you could give a single piece of advice to all those people aspiring to be published out there, what would it be?
I think it would be to, I think in kind of the path of the publications, it's to kind of get lost on the way with kind of, that goal of publication and that being like a huge dream for, many, many people. I think just focusing on, your love of writing, your love of reading, and kind of just enjoying that, because it can sort of, I think all these things can interfere with your enjoyment of reading, which is how you began to become a writer in the first place and how you kind of began to be a reader in the first place. So just kind of enjoying, the amazing kind of books that are out there, enjoying the process of writing and kind of taking your own time and doing it your own way. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Qualified, but yeah, that's
thank you. That's really great.
Yeah.
And so what's next for you? Are you already working on a new writing project? Can you share what's coming up?
So when my book was sold in the UK and in Australia, it was a 2-book deal.
Mm-hmm.
So my next book is going to be a book of essays called All the Same as Tender. And that's really, for me, a way of kind of finding an uncontainer, what I call an infinity pool for kind of racial feeling, a way of talking about what wells up inside of us every day that we exist here, of turning that conversation away from what they say about us to what we feel, and of really thinking about that kind of experience of anti-Asian racism and Asian identity, that kind of thing, in a way that's sort of fluid and ineffable and kind of slouches and reaches towards something that I guess can't fully be articulated or kind of pinned down like a butterfly to a piece of card. So yeah, that's kind of my next book, and I'm working a little bit on that at the moment. And yeah, I look forward to sharing it.
Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye out for it. Absolutely. So my last question for you, in the novel, girl stumbles upon a library at Oxford University, and she says, when I happened upon a library, I was excited. Libraries were the place I sought refuge until the storms in my heart passed. And I guess coming to you from a library service, Gold Coast Libraries here on the Gold Coast, I guess I just wanted to know, what's your relationship with libraries?
I love libraries so much. I, grew up going to them every weekend. I'd just be free to go and get whatever book I wanted, bring them home, read. Libraries are such an amazing place, and so it's amazing work that I think you guys are doing. I've actually worked in public libraries before. I worked from maybe the age of 16 to, I don't know, like 22. So I had many years working in public libraries, and they are magical places. There's no other place in the world where you can just sit somewhere, you can be warm, you can be free to read anything you want, you can do what you want, and you're allowed to kind of, I guess, find solace in libraries, which is kind of what I was talking about in the book there. So yeah, I do love libraries. I love the work that you guys
Thank
are doing.
you. We love to hear that. And thank you, Jessica, for chatting to us today. For everyone out there who's curious about the book, But the Girl, we've got it in the library collection, so request a copy today. And there's so many reasons why readers should be supporting the journey of a debut author. It can help you read outside your comfort zone, get a new perspective, and it also helps the industry continue to foster literary talent in Australia, which, that's a win for all of us book lovers all round. So thank you. Please make sure you keep an eye out for any other upcoming Discover a Debut author events and interviews. You never know, you might just find your next favourite read. So again, thanks for joining us, Jessica, and congratulations on your debut book, But the Girl.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really great to chat about it.